Welcome back to Verified Fears. I'm your host, and tonight we're exploring 11 disturbing true stories from highway patrol officers across America. These are first-hand accounts from the men and women who patrol our most isolated roads, sharing encounters that defy explanation and discoveries that left them questioning reality itself. From vanishing motorists to impossible pursuits, each story becomes more unsettling than the last. Some cases remain open, others have been sealed by authorities, and a few have left officers permanently changed. So buckle up, because what you're about to hear might make you think twice about your next late-night drive. Let's start with Sergeant Brinley and a case that still haunts her 6 years later. My name is Sergeant Brinley, and I've been patrolling New Mexico's highways for 8 years now. I've seen car wrecks that would turn your stomach, dealt with drug runners, and pulled over more drunk drivers than I can count. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened on September 15th, 2019. It was a night that changed how I view my job, and honestly, how I view reality itself. I was working the graveyard shift, patrolling a particularly desolate stretch of Interstate 40 that cuts through the high desert between Albuquerque and Amarillo. It's a lonesome piece of road, especially at night. The nearest town is about 40 miles in either direction, and during those late hours, you might go an entire shift without seeing another vehicle. The landscape out there is just endless scrubland and mesas, bathed in moonlight that makes everything look otherworldly. Most officers hate this assignment, but I actually preferred it. The solitude gave me time to think, and the quiet was a welcome break from the chaos of city patrols. It was around 2:30 in the morning when dispatch crackled over my radio. Unit 47, we've got a report of a stranded motorist at mile marker 112. Caller reported seeing a woman standing by a disabled vehicle, waving for help. I acknowledged the call and headed toward the location. Mile marker 112 was in one of the most isolated sections of my patrol route, about 15 miles from the nearest exit. As I drove, I remember thinking it was odd that someone had been able to call it in, since cell service in that area is practically non-existent. The night was clear, with a 3/4 moon providing decent visibility across the desert floor. As I approached mile marker 112, I could see a vehicle ahead with its hazard lights blinking. It was a silver sedan, maybe a Honda Accord, parked on the shoulder with the driver's side door slightly ajar. I pulled up behind it, activated my emergency lights, and radioed my location to dispatch. Unit 47 on scene at mile marker 112, investigating stranded motorist. I approached the vehicle cautiously, as we're trained to do. The engine was running, which immediately struck me as strange. If someone had broken down, why would the engine still be running? The headlights were on, casting long beams into the desert darkness. As I got closer, I could hear the radio playing softly inside the car. I called out, "Hello? State Police? Anyone need assistance?" No response. When I reached the driver's side door, I peered inside and felt my stomach drop. The car was clearly occupied, or had been recently. A woman's purse sat on the passenger seat, its contents partially spilled out. I could see a wallet, makeup, car keys, and a cell phone. The driver's seat was adjusted for someone much shorter than me, and there was a half-finished cup of coffee in the center console that was still warm. The radio was tuned to a local station, playing some late-night talk show. Everything suggested that someone had just stepped out of the vehicle moments before my arrival. I walked around the car, calling out repeatedly and shining my flashlight in all directions. The desert floor around the vehicle showed no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away from the road, nothing to indicate where the driver might have gone. This part of A40 is built on a raised roadbed, with about a 4-foot drop to the desert floor on either side. But even accounting for that, there was nowhere for someone to hide. The terrain is completely flat scrubland with scattered creosote bushes, none large enough to conceal a person. You could see for miles in every direction under that moonlight. I radioed for backup and began a more thorough investigation of the vehicle. The registration in the glove compartment showed the car belonged to Jennifer Vasquez, a 34-year-old woman from Phoenix. Her driver's license photo matched the woman in several family photos I found in her purse. According to the documents, she had no outstanding warrants, no history of mental illness, nothing that would explain a voluntary disappearance. Her cell phone showed the last outgoing call was to 8AA roadside assistance at 1:47 a.m., about 45 minutes before my arrival. When I called the number back, they confirmed they had received a call from that number reporting a flat tire at mile marker 112, but their nearest service truck was over an hour away. Here's where it gets really strange. I walked completely around the vehicle multiple times, checking every inch of the ground with my flashlight. There were no flat tires. All 4 tires were properly inflated and in good condition. There were no signs of mechanical trouble whatsoever. The fuel gauge showed a full tank, all fluids were at proper levels, and the engine was running smoothly. So why had she called for roadside assistance? By the time backup arrived, I had been on scene for over an hour. Officer Martinez helped me conduct an expanded search of the area, and we called in a helicopter with thermal imaging. For 3 hours, we combed every inch of desert within a 2-mile radius of that car. The helicopter's thermal cameras detected some wildlife, mostly coyotes and jackrabbits, but no human heat signatures anywhere in the area. It was as if Jennifer Vasquez had simply vanished into thin air. The investigation that followed was thorough but frustrating. Jennifer's family confirmed that she had been driving from Phoenix to visit her sister in Amarillo, a trip she had made dozens of times before. She was familiar with the route and had never had any reason to stop at mile marker 112. Security cameras at the last gas station she visited, about 60 miles back, showed her filling up at 11:30 p.m. She appeared normal, paid for her gas and a coffee, and left alone. There was no indication of any problems or anyone following her. The really unsettling part came when we examined her cell phone records more closely. That call to AAA at 1:47 a.m. lasted exactly 4 minutes and 23 seconds. But when we requested the recording of the call from AAA, they told us something that still gives me chills. The woman on the recording didn't sound distressed or confused. She calmly reported her location, described having a flat tire, and provided her membership number. Her voice was steady, professional even. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. The voice analysis showed some irregularities that the technicians couldn't explain. They said it sounded artificially calm, like someone reading from a script or speaking under duress. We investigated every possible angle. Had she been kidnapped? There were no signs of struggle, and why would kidnappers leave her purse and identification behind? Had she suffered some kind of medical emergency and wandered into the desert in a confused state? The helicopter's thermal imaging would have detected her body heat, and besides, where could she have gone in that flat, open terrain? Had she committed suicide? We found no note, no history of depression, and again, no body despite extensive searches. The case remained open for months, and I personally spent countless off-duty hours driving that stretch of highway, hoping to find some clue that would explain what happened to Jennifer Vasquez. I interviewed every truck driver, every traveler who regularly used that route. I studied meteorological reports, geological surveys, anything that might provide an explanation. I even consulted with search and rescue experts from other states who had dealt with similar cases. What haunts me most is that I still patrol that same stretch of I-40, and every time I pass mile marker 112, I slow down and scan the desert with my spotlight. Sometimes, especially on clear nights like that September evening, I swear I can still see that silver sedan sitting on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking. Of course, when I get closer, there's nothing there but empty highway and desert wind. Jennifer Vasquez was officially declared a missing person, and her case remains open to this day. Her family holds out hope that she'll be found alive, but as the months turned into years, that hope has faded. I still check the missing persons database regularly, not just for Jennifer, but for any similar cases. What I've found is disturbing. There are dozens of reports of people vanishing from remote highways under similar circumstances. Cars found running with personal effects inside, no signs of struggle, no trace of the occupants. 6 years later, I still don't have answers, and I don't think I ever will. But I do know this. There are things that happen out there on those lonely stretches of highway that can't be explained by conventional logic. As officers, we're trained to find rational explanations for everything we encounter. But sometimes, there simply aren't any. Jennifer Vasquez disappeared into the New Mexico desert as completely as if she had never existed at all, leaving behind only questions that no amount of investigation has been able to answer. I'm Trooper Rubin, California Highway Patrol, and I've been working these roads for 12 years. In that time, I've pulled over everyone from celebrities trying to outrun paparazzi to cartel smugglers with trunks full of narcotics. I thought I'd seen every type of driver, every possible scenario that could unfold during a traffic stop. That confidence was shattered on a foggy October night in 2020, when I encountered something that still makes me question everything I thought I knew about routine police work. It was October 23rd, around 11:45 p.m., and I was patrolling Highway 101 north of San Francisco. The marine layer had rolled in heavy that evening, creating one of those thick coastal fogs that reduces visibility to maybe 30 feet. It's dangerous driving conditions, and I was keeping a close eye on traffic, watching for drivers who might be struggling with the limited visibility. Most sensible people had pulled off to wait it out. But there's always someone who thinks they can push through anything. That's when I spotted the erratic driver. A dark blue Toyota Camry was weaving slightly between lanes, not aggressively, but enough to catch my attention. The car would drift toward the center line, then overcorrect toward the shoulder, like the driver was having trouble staying oriented in the fog. I followed for about a mile, and the pattern continued. The vehicle's speed was inconsistent too, dropping to 45 miles per hour, then suddenly accelerating to 65, then slowing again. Classic signs of either impaired driving or someone who was lost and confused. I activated my emergency lights and initiated the traffic stop. The Camry pulled over immediately, which was actually a good sign. Drunk or high drivers often try to evade, but this person seemed cooperative. I called in the stop to dispatch, giving them the license plate number and my location at mile marker 487. The fog was so thick that my headlights barely illuminated the back of the stopped vehicle, and I had to approach more carefully than usual. As I walked up to the driver's side window, I could see it was an elderly man, probably in his 70s, with gray hair and a confused expression. He had his hands on the steering wheel in the proper position, another good sign. When I tapped on the window, he rolled it down immediately and looked up at me with these watery blue eyes that seemed completely lost. "Good evening, sir. I'm Trooper Rubin with the California Highway Patrol. I stopped you because I observed some erratic driving. Are you having any difficulty tonight? I kept my tone professional but friendly, trying to assess whether this was a DUI situation or something else. The man looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Officer, I'm trying to get home. I've been driving for a while now, and I think I might have taken a wrong turn somewhere." His voice was shaky, not slurred, and I could smell coffee on his breath, not alcohol. He seemed genuinely confused, rather than impaired. "Can I see your driver's license and registration, please?" I asked. He fumbled around in his wallet and handed me his license. The name was Harold Brennan, age 74, with an address in Bakersfield. I looked at the license, then back at him. "Mr. Brennan, according to your license, you live in Bakersfield. That's about 400 miles south of here. Where exactly are you trying to get to?" He stared at me blankly for a moment, then said, "Home. I'm trying to get home to Bakersfield. I left work a little while ago and got turned around in this fog." Something about his response immediately struck me as odd. It was nearly midnight on a Friday, and this man appeared to be well past retirement age. What kind of work would he be leaving at this hour? "What kind of work do you do, Mr. Brennan?" I asked, shining my flashlight into the vehicle to get a better look around. That's when I noticed the back seat was filled with children's toys. Stuffed animals, coloring books, a few small dolls, some toy cars. There had to be dozens of items back there, all neatly arranged like someone had carefully placed them. "I'm a teacher," he replied. "Elementary school. I was staying late to grade papers and set up for Monday's activities." He gestured toward the back seat. "Those are for my students. We're doing a show and tell next week." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October fog. Something was very wrong here. I asked him what school he taught at, and he gave me the name of an elementary school in Bakersfield. When I asked how long he'd been teaching there, he said 28 years. But when I asked him what day it was, he hesitated for a long time before saying, "Friday?" "Mr. Brennan, what's the last thing you remember clearly?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I was starting to suspect this might be a medical emergency, possibly dementia or some kind of neurological episode. He rubbed his forehead with his free hand and stared straight ahead through the windshield. "I remember being at school. I was in my classroom getting ready for the weekend. But that was..." He paused, looking confused. "That was recent, wasn't it? Today?" I asked him what month it was. He said October. When I asked what year, he said 2020, which was correct. But when I asked him about COVID-19 and whether his school was still doing in-person classes, he looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Mr. Brennan, I need you to think carefully. What's the last specific thing you remember? Was it this morning? Yesterday?" I was trying to establish a timeline to figure out how long he might have been driving around confused. He closed his eyes and concentrated. "I remember coming into my classroom on Monday morning. The children were excited about something, but I can't remember what. Then he opened his eyes and looked at me with genuine fear. "Officer, I don't remember anything else. I don't remember Tuesday or Wednesday or any day since then. How is that possible?" I called for backup and requested a supervisor to respond to the scene. While waiting, I continued talking to Mr. Brennan, trying to piece together what had happened. He insisted that he had left school just a little while ago and was simply trying to drive home to Bakersfield. But he couldn't explain how he had ended up 400 miles north of his destination. When I asked about the toys in his back seat, He became agitated. "Those aren't mine," he said suddenly. "I mean, they're for the children, but I don't remember putting them in my car. Why would I take them home over the weekend?" He turned around to look at the back seat, and his expression changed to one of genuine confusion and concern. "There are so many of them. Where did they all come from?" When my supervisor arrived, we conducted a more thorough investigation. We searched the vehicle and found some disturbing things. In the trunk, there were more toys, children's clothing in various sizes, and several items that appeared to be personal belongings. Hair ribbons, a small backpack with a name tag reading Emma, a pair of children's sneakers that looked well worn. None of it belonged to Mr. Brennan, and he had no explanation for any of it. We ran his license and found that it was valid, with no outstanding warrants or red flags. But when we contacted the school district in Bakersfield, we discovered something that made the situation even more unsettling. Harold Brennan had indeed been a teacher at the elementary school he named, but he had retired 3 years earlier due to early-onset dementia. The school had no record of him being on campus recently, and his former colleagues hadn't seen him in months. Even more disturbing was what we learned when we contacted his family. His daughter, who lived in Fresno, told us that her father had been missing for 3 days. She had filed a missing person report with the Bakersfield police on Tuesday after he failed to show up for a doctor's appointment. She said his dementia had been progressing slowly, but he had never disappeared before, or shown any signs of confusion severe enough to cause him to drive hundreds of miles in the wrong direction. The question that haunted me was, where had Harold Brennan been for those 3 missing days? And where had all those children's items come from? We contacted every school district, daycare center, and children's organization within a 100-mile radius of where I found him, but none reported any missing items. The toys and clothing appeared to be well used, not recently purchased, suggesting they had belonged to actual children. We also discovered that Mr. Brennan's car had over 800 additional miles on the odometer since his daughter had last seen him, far more than could be accounted for by driving from Bakersfield to where I found him. Where had he driven during those 3 days? What had he been doing? Most troubling of all, whose children's belongings were in his car? And how had he acquired them? The medical evaluation that followed confirmed that Harold Brennan was suffering from moderate to severe dementia, which explained his confusion about time and place. But it didn't explain the missing 3 days, the extra mileage, or the unexplained items in his vehicle. The doctors said that while dementia could cause someone to become lost or confused about their surroundings, it was unlikely to cause such a complete memory gap about recent events. Mr. Brennan was returned to his family's care, and the case was closed as a medical emergency with no criminal charges filed. But I've never been able to forget those 3 missing days or those children's belongings. I submitted all the items to evidence, hoping that someday they might be connected to missing person cases or help solve some other mystery. As far as I know, they're still sitting in an evidence locker somewhere, unclaimed and unexplained. This case changed how I approach traffic stops, especially with elderly drivers. Now I always ask more detailed questions about where they've been and where they're going, not just where they think they're supposed to be. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't what people remember about their journey, but what they can't remember at all. Harold Brennan lost 3 days of his life somewhere on California's highways, and neither he nor anyone else will ever know what happened during that time. The thought that there might be other drivers out there, wandering our roads with no memory of how they got there or what they did along the way, is something that still keeps me alert during every shift. My name is Officer Jolene, and I've been with the Wyoming State Patrol for 6 years. When people think of Wyoming, they usually picture wide-open spaces, beautiful landscapes, and peaceful small towns. What they don't realize is that those same vast, empty spaces can hide some of the darkest secrets you'll ever encounter. I learned that lesson the hard way on a cold March night in 2021, during what should have been a routine welfare check at a rest area on Interstate 80. It was March 18th, around 4:15 in the morning, and I was nearing the end of my overnight shift. The temperature had dropped to about 15 degrees, with a bitter wind that cut right through your uniform. I-80 was mostly empty at that hour, just the occasional long-haul trucker pushing through to make their delivery schedules. I was looking forward to getting home, warming up with some coffee, and getting a few hours of sleep before my daughter's soccer practice that afternoon. That's when dispatch crackled over my radio with a call that would change everything. Unit 23. We need you to respond to the Blue Creek rest area at mile marker 156. We've got reports of an individual acting strangely, possibly disturbing other travelers. Complainant says the person appears to be digging behind the restroom facilities. I acknowledged the call and headed toward the rest area. Blue Creek was one of those basic highway rest stops you see all over Wyoming. Just a small parking area with restrooms, a few picnic tables, and some informational signs about local wildlife. It's surrounded by sagebrush and rolling hills, completely isolated from any towns or businesses. During daylight hours, it gets a fair amount of traffic from tourists and truckers. But at 4 a.m. in March, it should have been completely deserted. As I pulled into the rest area, my headlights swept across the parking lot, and I could see a single vehicle parked near the restrooms, an old pickup truck with local plates. The person who had called it in must have already left, because there were no other cars around. I parked near the truck and grabbed my flashlight, then walked toward the restroom building to investigate. The wind was howling across the open landscape, making an eerie whistling sound as it whipped around the concrete structure. I called out, "Wyoming State Patrol. Is anyone here?" No response. I walked around to the back of the building, behind the restrooms where the maintenance equipment was stored. And that's when I saw him. There was a man, probably in his 50s, kneeling on the frozen ground behind the building. He was digging with his bare hands in the hard earth, his fingers bloody and raw from clawing at the rocky soil. He was wearing just a thin jacket and jeans, completely inadequate for the freezing temperature. But he didn't seem to notice the cold at all. His movements were frantic, desperate, like he was racing against time to uncover something buried beneath the surface. "Sir, Wyoming, State Patrol," I called out, approaching cautiously with my hand near my weapon. "I need you to stop what you're doing and turn around slowly." He looked up at me, and I'll never forget his eyes. They were wild, terrified, but also filled with a kind of grim determination. His face was streaked with dirt and what looked like tears. "I have to return it," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "I have to put it back where it belongs. I never should have taken it in the first place." "Return what, sir?" "What are you trying to return?" I kept my flashlight trained on him while calling for backup on my radio. Something about his demeanor told me this wasn't just a case of someone having a mental health episode. There was something deeper, something more disturbing going on here. He went back to digging, ignoring my commands to stop. "I found it 3 years ago," he said, his words coming out in rapid, panicked bursts. "Right here, in this same spot. I was traveling through, stopped to use the restroom, and I saw something sticking up out of the ground behind the building. I thought it might be valuable, so I dug it up. I should have left it alone. I should have called the police. But I was curious, and I was stupid, and now? Now what, sir? What did you find? I moved closer, trying to see what he was digging for. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see that he had already made a significant hole in the frozen ground, maybe 2 feet across and about 18 inches deep. His hands were leaving bloody smears on the dirt and rocks as he continued clawing at the earth. Bones, he whispered. Small bones. A child's bones. And this. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out what looked like a small, tarnished piece of jewelry. Even in the dim light, I could see it was a bracelet. The kind a young girl might wear, with small charms hanging from it. My blood went cold. I immediately radioed for additional backup and requested that they contact the county coroner and crime scene investigators. Sir, I need you to stop digging right now and step away from that area. This is potentially a crime scene. But he wouldn't stop. If anything, he became more frantic. You don't understand, he said, his voice rising to almost a shout. I've had this for 3 years, and every night, every single night, she comes to me in my dreams. She's looking for it. She knows I took it, and she won't rest until I return it. She shows me what happened to her over and over again. I can't take it anymore. Who comes to you? What does she show you? I was trying to keep him talking while waiting for backup, but his words were sending chills down my spine that had nothing to do with the Wyoming wind. He looked up at me again, and I could see that he was crying. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She had blonde hair and was wearing a blue dress. In the dreams, she shows me how she died, how someone hurt her and buried her here. She shows me her parents looking for her, calling her name, never knowing what happened. And she shows me that bracelet, tells me it was a gift from her grandmother, and that it belongs with her. Backup arrived just as he started digging even more frantically. It took 3 of us to pull him away from the hole, and even then, he kept reaching toward it, begging us to let him finish what he had started. We secured him in the back of a patrol car while crime scene investigators took over the scene. What they found in that hole behind the Blue Creek rest area confirmed my worst fears. About 3 feet down, they uncovered the skeletal remains of a small child, along with fragments of clothing and other personal items. The coroner estimated that the bones had been buried there for at least 5 years, possibly longer. The victim was indeed a young girl, approximately 7 to 9 years old based on the bone development. The man we had arrested was named Robert Hendricks, a truck driver from Colorado who had no prior criminal record. His story checked out. 3 years earlier, he had been passing through Wyoming on a delivery run and had stopped at the Blue Creek rest area. According to his statement, he had noticed something glinting in the dirt behind the restroom building and had dug it up out of curiosity. When he found the bracelet, he had pocketed it without thinking much about it. But according to Hendricks, that's when the nightmares started. Every night for 3 years, he claimed to have been visited by the spirit of a young girl who showed him disturbing images of her death and begged for the return of her bracelet. The dreams had become so vivid and terrifying that he had finally driven back to Wyoming, determined to return the jewelry to its original location. The investigation that followed was extensive. The remains were identified through dental records as belonging to Sarah Martinez, an 8-year-old girl who had disappeared from a campground about 40 miles away in July of 2016. Her family had been traveling cross-country when she vanished from their campsite one night. Despite massive search efforts involving hundreds of volunteers and multiple law enforcement agencies, no trace of her had ever been found until that night at the rest area. The bracelet that Hendricks had taken was indeed identified by Sarah's family as belonging to their daughter. It had been a gift from her maternal grandmother, just as Hendricks had described in his dreams. The family confirmed that Sarah had been wearing it on the night she disappeared, and it was one of the details they had provided to investigators, but had never been released to the public. What disturbed me most about this case wasn't just the tragic discovery of Sarah's remains, but the implications of how they had been found. Robert Hendricks had no connection to Sarah's disappearance and had never been in the area when she went missing. Yet somehow, his disturbing dreams had led him back to the exact spot where her body was buried, driven by what he claimed were supernatural encounters with the victim herself. The case remained open as investigators worked to identify Sarah's killer, but Hendricks was eventually released without charges related to her death. However, the experience had clearly taken a tremendous toll on him. During his interviews, he appeared to be a broken man, haunted by 3 years of nightmares and the guilt of having taken something that didn't belong to him. For me, this case marked a turning point in my career. I requested a transfer to day shifts and have avoided working at isolated locations whenever possible. The idea that there might be other victims buried in remote locations waiting to be discovered is something that weighs heavily on my mind. Even more unsettling is the possibility that sometimes the dead might find ways to communicate with the living, to seek justice, or simply to reclaim what was taken from them. I still drive past the Blue Creek Rest area occasionally during my patrols, but I never stop there anymore. The state installed additional lighting and increased security after Sarah's body was found, but the place still feels wrong to me somehow. Sometimes, especially on cold, windy nights like the one when we found her, I swear I can see a small figure standing near the restroom building, as if she's still waiting for something. Of course, when I look more closely, there's never anyone there. But the feeling lingers long after I've driven away. Sarah Martinez was finally laid to rest with her family, and her bracelet was returned to her parents as part of her burial. But her killer was never found, and the question of how Robert Hendricks knew exactly where to dig for her remains is something that investigators have never been able to explain satisfactorily. Some cases leave you with more questions than answers, and this was definitely one of them. My name is Trooper David Park, and I've been patrolling Nevada's highways for 15 years. In that time, I've responded to everything from multi-car pileups to high-speed chases across some of the most desolate terrain in America. Nevada's Highway 50, known as the loneliest road in America, has been my beat for the last 8 years, and I thought I'd seen every type of emergency that stretch of asphalt could throw at me. That changed on July 14th, 2018, when I responded to what should have been a routine vehicle accident, but turned into something that still haunts my dreams and led to me requesting psychological evaluation. It was just past midnight on a clear summer night, the kind where you can see every star in the sky thanks to the complete absence of light pollution out there in central Nevada. The temperature was still in the 80s despite the late hour, and I was patrolling the section of Route 50 between Austin and Eureka, about as isolated as you can get in the continental United States. Out there, you might go hours without seeing another vehicle, and cell phone coverage is non-existent for miles at a stretch. I was about 40 miles east of Austin when my radio crackled to life. Unit 12, we need you to respond to a vehicle accident with injuries at mile marker 78. We received a 911 call reporting a rollover accident with multiple victims trapped inside. I acknowledged the call and immediately activated my emergency lights, pushing my patrol car as fast as safely possible across that dark highway. Mile marker 78 was in one of the most remote sections of my patrol area, where the road cuts through a series of low hills covered in sagebrush and stunted juniper trees. As I raced toward the scene, I called for backup and requested that an ambulance be dispatched from Eureka, knowing it would take at least 45 minutes for medical help to arrive. In situations like this, every minute counts, and I prepared myself mentally for what I might find. When I arrived at mile marker 78, my headlights immediately illuminated the accident scene. A dark SUV had rolled multiple times and come to rest on its roof about 50 feet from the highway, down in a shallow ravine. The vehicle was severely damaged, with all the windows blown out and the roof crushed down significantly. In the beam of my spotlight, I could see what appeared to be at least 3 people still inside the overturned vehicle. I grabbed my emergency kit and first aid supplies, then made my way down the embankment to the crashed SUV. As I approached the vehicle, I could hear moaning and crying from inside, confirming that there were survivors who needed immediate assistance. "Nevada State Patrol," I called out. "Help is on the way. Can anyone hear me?" A weak voice responded from inside the vehicle. "Please help us. We're trapped. My wife is hurt badly, and I think my daughter might be unconscious." It was a man's voice, strained with pain and panic. I could see him, through the shattered rear window, a middle-aged man with blood on his face, trying to reach toward the front seats where 2 other figures were visible. I immediately began assessing the situation and trying to provide what assistance I could. The man in the back seat told me his name was Michael Thompson, and that he had been driving with his wife Karen and their 16-year-old daughter Emma from California to Colorado for a family vacation. He said they had swerved to avoid an animal in the road and lost control of the vehicle. Working by flashlight, I could see that Karen Thompson appeared to be unconscious in the front passenger seat, with what looked like serious head injuries. Their daughter Emma was slumped over the steering wheel, which confused me since Michael had said he was driving. When I asked about this discrepancy, Michael became agitated and insisted that Emma had been in the back seat with him, that his wife had been driving. The more I tried to assess their injuries and provide first aid, the more disturbing details I began to notice. The family's clothing looked wrong somehow, not like typical vacation attire, but more formal, like they had been dressed for a special occasion. Karen was wearing what appeared to be a blue dress that seemed oddly familiar, though I couldn't place why. Emma was wearing a white dress with small flowers on it, and Michael was in a suit and tie. Even more unsettling was the condition of their injuries. While there was blood visible and all 3 family members were clearly in distress, the nature of their wounds didn't match what I would expect from a fresh rollover accident. The blood looked darker, more congealed than it should have been, and there was a strange odor coming from the vehicle that I couldn't identify, but that made my stomach turn. As I worked to keep the family stable while waiting for backup and medical assistance, I tried to get more information about what had happened. Michael's story kept changing in small but significant ways. First, he said they had been driving east toward Colorado. Then he mentioned they were heading west back to California. He couldn't remember what time the accident had occurred or even what day it was. When I asked Karen and Emma direct questions, their responses were even more confusing. Karen would drift in and out of consciousness, and when she spoke, she would ask about people I had never heard of, mentioning names that didn't match the family members Michael had identified. Emma seemed to be in shock, repeating the same phrases over and over again. "We were supposed to be there by now. They're waiting for us. We can't be late." The backup I had requested finally arrived about 30 minutes after I reached the scene. Officer Martinez brought additional medical supplies and helped me continue treating the family while we waited for the ambulance. But when he arrived, something strange happened. as he approached the overturned vehicle with his flashlight. He stopped suddenly and looked at me with complete confusion. "Park, what are you doing?" he asked. "There's nobody in that vehicle?" I looked at him like he had lost his mind. "What are you talking about?" "There are 3 people trapped inside. The Thompson family. I've been treating them for the last half hour." I gestured toward the SUV, but when I looked back at it, my blood went cold. The vehicle was empty. Completely empty. No sign of Michael, Karen, or Emma Thompson. No blood. No personal belongings. Nothing to indicate that anyone had been inside at all. I stood there in shock, staring at the empty wreckage, unable to process what I was seeing. Martinez walked around the entire vehicle, shining his flashlight into every corner of the interior. "There's nobody here, Park. This vehicle has been empty for a while. Look at the condition of the metal and glass. This accident didn't happen tonight. This looks like it's been here for days, maybe longer." He was right. In the better lighting provided by both our flashlights, I could see that the vehicle showed signs of weathering that wouldn't be present in a fresh accident. There was rust around the broken edges of the metal, and debris had already started to accumulate inside the vehicle. The license plate was partially obscured by dirt and sand that would have taken time to accumulate. We called for additional backup and crime scene investigators, and I submitted a detailed report of what I had experienced. The investigation that followed revealed disturbing facts about the accident scene. The SUV had Nevada plates registered to a family named Thompson. But when investigators tracked down the registration, they discovered that Michael, Karen, and Emma Thompson had been killed in a rollover accident at that exact location 4 days earlier. The family had been traveling from California to Colorado for a wedding when they lost control of their vehicle and crashed. All 3 had been pronounced dead at the scene by the medical examiner. Their bodies had been recovered and released to a funeral home in Las Vegas, where they had been buried 2 days before my encounter with them. The accident report confirmed every detail that Michael had told me during my response, including the fact that they had swerved to avoid an animal. Even more unsettling was the discovery that the 911 call that had dispatched me to the scene had come from a cell phone registered to Michael Thompson. But his phone had been recovered from the accident scene 4 days earlier and was in the possession of the Nevada Highway Patrol as evidence. The phone had been powered off and locked in an evidence locker when the call was placed. The recording of the 911 call was perhaps the most disturbing evidence of all. The voice on the recording was clearly that of a man in distress, reporting a rollover accident with injuries and requesting immediate assistance. The caller provided accurate location, information, and details about the accident that matched the original incident perfectly. But according to the phone records, the call had been placed from a phone that was locked in evidence storage 4 days after its owner had been declared dead. I was placed on administrative leave pending a psychological evaluation, which was standard procedure for officers who reported experiences that couldn't be rationally explained. During those sessions, I tried to make sense of what had happened that night, but I never found satisfactory answers. The psychologist concluded that I had likely experienced a form of stress-induced hallucination, possibly triggered by the isolated conditions and the disturbing nature of the accident scene. But I know what I experienced that night wasn't a hallucination. I spent over 30 minutes talking to Michael Thompson, treating his injuries, and trying to comfort his family. I saw their faces clearly, heard their voices, felt their fear and pain. The conversation we had was detailed and specific, far beyond what could be explained by psychological stress or fatigue. I was eventually cleared to return to duty, but I requested a transfer away from the remote sections of Highway 50. The incident fundamentally changed how I approach accident scenes and emergency calls. I still do my job to the best of my ability, but there's always a part of me that wonders whether the people I'm helping are actually there, or whether I'm responding to echoes of tragedies that have already played out. Sometimes, late at night when I'm patrolling Nevada's lonely highways, I think about the Thompson family and wonder if they're still out there somewhere, still trapped in that overturned SUV, still waiting for help that can never really save them. The thought that some accidents might replay themselves, that the victims might be doomed to relive their final moments over and over again, is something that stays with me every time I respond to an emergency call on those dark, empty roads. My name is Sergeant Kevin Murphy, and I've been with the Texas Department of Public Safety for 20 years. 2 decades of chasing speeders, drug runners, and criminals across some of the most unforgiving terrain in America. I've been in high-speed pursuits that lasted hours, tracked down fugitives through backcountry roads, and thought I'd seen every trick in the book when it comes to suspects trying to evade law enforcement. That confidence was shattered on December 8th, 2019, during what started as a routine checkpoint stop, but turned into the most impossible pursuit of my career. One that officially never happened, according to my department's records. It was 3:20 in the morning on a bitter cold December night in the Texas Panhandle. We had set up a sobriety checkpoint on Interstate 35, about 30 miles north of Amarillo, a stretch of highway known for drunk drivers trying to make it home from the bars and clubs in the city. The temperature had dropped to about 18 degrees, with a fierce north wind that made it feel even colder. My partner, Officer Jenkins, and I were working the checkpoint along with 2 other units, stopping vehicles and checking for impaired drivers. Traffic was light at that hour, mostly long-haul truckers and the occasional late-night traveler. We had been out there for about 2 hours and had made 3 DUI arrests when I saw headlights approaching from the south. The vehicle was moving fast, probably 15 to 20 miles over the speed limit, which immediately caught my attention. As it got closer, I could see it was a dark sedan, maybe a Dodge Charger, with heavily tinted windows. I stepped into the roadway with my flashlight and signaled for the vehicle to slow down and move into the checkpoint lane. Instead of complying, the driver suddenly accelerated and blew right past our position, barely missing me as I dove out of the way. "We've got a runner," I shouted into my radio as I sprinted back to my patrol car. Jenkins was already behind the wheel with the engine running. We took off in pursuit, activating our emergency lights and siren as we accelerated to catch up with the fleeing vehicle. I radioed dispatch to report the pursuit and requested additional units to assist with containment. Unit 47 in pursuit of a dark sedan, possibly a Dodge Charger, northbound on I-35 at mile marker 312. Vehicle fled a sobriety checkpoint at high speed. The suspect vehicle had about a quarter-mile head start, but we were gaining on them rapidly. Our patrol car was equipped with a high-performance engine specifically designed for pursuits, and I could see the gap closing as we pushed past 90 miles per hour. The highway ahead was straight and flat, typical for that part of Texas, with excellent visibility despite the late hour. What happened next defied everything I thought I knew about vehicle pursuits. As we closed to within about 200 yards of the suspect vehicle, I had a clear view of it in our headlights. It was definitely a dark-colored Dodge Charger, and I could make out the license plate number well enough to call it in to dispatch. The vehicle was maintaining a steady speed of around 95 miles per hour, fast, but not the reckless speeds you sometimes see in desperate flight attempts. I was in the passenger seat, coordinating with dispatch and preparing to deploy spike strips further ahead, when Jenkins suddenly pointed straight ahead and said something that still gives me chills. "Kevin, look at that car." Look at it closely. I focused on the vehicle we were pursuing, and that's when I noticed something that made no sense. Despite traveling at nearly 100 miles per hour, the Charger wasn't creating any of the visual disturbances you would normally see from a moving vehicle at that speed. There was no dust or debris being kicked up from the road's surface, no heat distortion from the exhaust, and most strangely, no red glow from brake lights, even though the vehicle was clearly maintaining a controlled speed. "That's impossible," I muttered. But I couldn't deny what I was seeing. The vehicle appeared to be gliding over the road's surface rather than making contact with it. Even more disturbing, as we got closer, I realized I couldn't hear the sound of the other vehicle's engine, despite our windows being down, and the fact that we should have been able to hear it clearly at that distance. We continued the pursuit for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only about 10 minutes. The suspect vehicle maintained its position ahead of us, never gaining significant distance, but never allowing us to close the final gap either. It was as if it was pacing us, staying just far enough ahead to remain out of reach, but close enough that we felt like we were making progress. I called for backup units to set up roadblocks at the next several exits. But as I was coordinating on the radio, Jenkins grabbed my arm with a grip that was almost painful. "Kevin, we have a problem. A big problem." I looked ahead and saw what he meant. We were approaching a straight stretch of highway that extended for at least 5 miles ahead of us, completely flat with no curves, hills, or obstructions of any kind. The road was illuminated by our headlights and the occasional street lamp, providing clear visibility from our position all the way to the horizon. But the vehicle we had been pursuing was gone. Not just out of sight, but completely vanished. There were no off-ramps, no side roads, no buildings or structures where a vehicle could hide. The highway ahead was empty in both directions, and there was nowhere for a car traveling at 95 miles per hour to go. It had simply disappeared into thin air on a straight, flat stretch of road where concealment was impossible. Jenkins slammed on the brakes, and we came to a stop in the middle of the highway. We sat there in stunned silence for several moments, trying to process what had just happened. I grabbed the radio and called dispatch. "Unit 47, we've lost visual contact with the suspect vehicle, requesting helicopter support for an area search." But when dispatch responded, they told us something that made the situation even more confusing. "Unit 47, we show no active pursuit in your area." "What suspect vehicle are you referring to?" I repeated my request and provided details about the vehicle that had fled our checkpoint. But dispatch insisted they had no record of any pursuit being initiated. According to their logs, we had been stationary at the checkpoint location for the entire shift, with no reports of any vehicles fleeing or any pursuits being authorized. When we returned to the checkpoint location, the other officers confirmed what dispatch had told us. According to them, Jenkins and I had never left our position. They said we had been standing by our patrol car for the entire time, apparently engaged in conversation, but had never gotten into the vehicle or responded to any fleeing suspect. The next morning, I requested to review the dashcam footage from our patrol car, certain that it would prove what we had experienced during the pursuit. But when the footage was pulled, it showed something that shook me to my core. The video clearly showed Jenkins and me standing beside our patrol car at the checkpoint location for the entire duration of what I remembered as a 40-minute high-speed chase. We never got in the car, never activated our emergency lights, never left the checkpoint. Even more disturbing was audio from our radio communications. The recordings showed normal checkpoint chatter between units, but none of the pursuit-related communications that I clearly remembered making. There was no record of me calling in the fleeing vehicle, requesting backup, or coordinating roadblocks. According to every piece of official evidence, the pursuit had never happened. But Jenkins remembered everything exactly as I did. We compared notes privately, and our recollections matched perfectly, down to specific details like the license plate number of the vehicle and the exact timestamps of our radio calls. We both remembered the same impossible details about the vehicle's behavior, the way it seemed to glide over the road's surface, and its sudden disappearance on the straight stretch of highway. When we tried to discuss the incident with our supervisors, we were told that stress and fatigue can sometimes cause shared hallucinations, especially during long overnight shifts in isolated conditions. We were both required to undergo psychological evaluations and were temporarily assigned to desk duty, while the department investigated our fitness for patrol operations. The psychological evaluation concluded that we had experienced a form of shared psychosis brought on by the monotonous conditions of checkpoint duty and the late hour. The psychologist explained that it was not uncommon for partners working closely together to experience similar hallucinations or false memories, especially in high-stress law enforcement situations. But I know what we experienced that night was real. The pursuit happened, the vehicle was there, and it vanished in a way that defied every law of physics I understand. The fact that it left no trace in our official records, no evidence on our dashcam, and no memory in the minds of our colleagues doesn't change what Jenkins and I witnessed. I was eventually cleared to return to full duty, but the incident had a lasting impact on both my partner and me. Jenkins requested a transfer to a different district and eventually left law enforcement altogether. I continued working, but I was never quite the same. Every pursuit I've been involved in since that night, I find myself watching for signs that what I'm chasing might not be entirely real. The most unsettling part of the whole experience was the official response. My department's insistence that the pursuit never happened, combined with the complete absence of any supporting evidence, felt less like a misunderstanding and more like a cover-up. I began to suspect that we weren't the first officers to report similar incidents, and that there might be standing procedures for dealing with such reports in a way that keeps them out of official records. Over the years since that night, I've quietly reached out to other officers in different jurisdictions, asking if they've ever experienced pursuits or encounters that seem to disappear from official records. While most won't discuss it openly, a surprising number have shared similar stories of chasing vehicles that behaved in impossible ways, only to find later that no record of the pursuit existed. I still patrol the same stretch of I-35 where the incident occurred, and sometimes, especially on cold December nights around 3:20 a.m., I find myself watching the road ahead more carefully than usual. Part of me wonders if that dark Charger is still out there somewhere, still running from checkpoints, still disappearing when cornered, leaving behind nothing but confused officers and missing memories. The thought that there might be things traveling our highways that exist just outside the boundaries of what we consider possible is something that changes how you view every vehicle you encounter in the dark. My name is Trooper Molina, and I've been patrolling Montana's highways for 9 years. Montana has some of the most beautiful and isolated roads in the country. But that isolation can also make it one of the most dangerous places to break down or find yourself in trouble. We take pride in helping stranded motorists, whether it's a flat tire, mechanical problems, or just someone who's lost their way. It's part of the job that I've always enjoyed, the human side of law enforcement that reminds you why you became a trooper in the first place. That feeling changed forever on August 23rd, 2020, when what seemed like a routine assistance call revealed something so disturbing that I requested an immediate transfer to a different district and rarely work alone anymore. It was about 6:30 in the morning, just as the sun was starting to rise over the eastern horizon, painting the Montana sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. I was patrolling Highway 2, a scenic but lonely stretch of road that runs across the northern part of the state near the Canadian border. The temperature was pleasant for late August, probably in the mid-60s, and I was enjoying the peaceful start to what I expected would be a routine day shift. That's when I spotted the stranded motorist. About half a mile ahead, I could see a small blue sedan pulled over on the shoulder with its hood up. As I got closer, I noticed there was already someone there helping. A tall man in a baseball cap and work clothes was leaning over the engine compartment, apparently trying to diagnose the problem. It's not uncommon for Good Samaritans to stop and help stranded drivers in Montana, especially on the more remote stretches where it might be hours before help arrives. I pulled over behind the vehicles and activated my emergency flashers, then approached to offer additional assistance. The stranded driver was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, with short brown hair and a worried expression. She appeared to be a college student, based on the university decal on her rear window and the textbooks visible in the back seat. "Good morning. I'm Trooper Molina with the Montana Highway Patrol," I said as I approached. "Is everything okay here?" The young woman turned to me with obvious relief. "Oh, thank goodness. My car just died on me about 20 minutes ago. This gentleman stopped to help, but we can't figure out what's wrong." She gestured toward the man who was still bent over the engine, his face hidden under the bill of his cap. "I appreciate you stopping to help," I said to the Good Samaritan. "What seems to be the problem?" He straightened up and turned to face me, and immediately something felt wrong. There was something about his smile that didn't reach his eyes, and the way he looked at me was uncomfortably intense. "Just trying to be helpful, officer. Looks like it might be an alternator problem, but it's hard to tell without the right tools." His voice was pleasant enough, but there was something underneath it that made me instinctively cautious. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was, but my training had taught me to trust my instincts when something felt off about a situation. "What's your name, miss?" I asked the stranded driver, wanting to get more information about the situation. "Jessica Morrison. I'm a student at University of Montana, heading back to campus after visiting my parents in Cut Bank." She seemed genuine and appropriately concerned about her situation, which was reassuring. I turned back to the helpful stranger. "And you, sir? Can I get your name?" "Tom Bradley," he replied immediately. "I was just passing through when I saw her broken down. Figured I'd stop and see if I could help." He gestured toward a white pickup truck parked about 50 feet ahead of Jessica's car. Something about his response bothered me, though I couldn't initially identify what it was. I asked Jessica to pop the trunk so I could retrieve some basic tools from my patrol car, and as I walked back to get them, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Tom Bradley's pickup truck had Montana plates, but what caught my attention were the items visible in the truck bed. There were several maps spread out and weighted down with rocks, and even from a distance, I could see that they were marked with numerous red circles and notations. There were also what appeared to be newspaper clippings taped to the inside of the rear window. When I returned with the tools, I started asking more detailed questions while pretending to examine Jessica's engine. "Tom, you said you were passing through. Where are you headed?" "Oh, just up to Calgary for some business," he replied casually. But Calgary was north, and he had been helping Jessica, whose car was pointed east. If he was truly just passing through northbound, he would have had to turn around to come back and help her, which seemed unnecessarily Good Samaritan behavior for a stranger. I continued working on the car while asking more questions. "What kind of business takes you to Calgary?" His answer was vague and evasive, something about consulting work that he couldn't really go into detail about. But what really alarmed me was when I casually asked about recent travel, and he mentioned being in several towns across Montana and North Dakota over the past few weeks. The names he mentioned made my stomach drop. Glendive, Sydney, Wolf Point, Glasgow, all towns where young women had gone missing over the past 18 months. I knew about these cases because they had been the subject of multiple law enforcement bulletins. 4 college-aged women had disappeared from various locations across eastern Montana and western North Dakota, all under circumstances that suggested they might be connected. I excused myself and walked back to my patrol car, ostensibly to call for a tow truck for Jessica, but actually to run Tom Bradley's information through our UFR database. What I found made the situation even more disturbing. The name Tom Bradley came back with no hits in Montana. But when I expanded the search to neighboring states, I found several Thomas Bradleys with criminal records involving stalking, harassment, and in one case, attempted kidnapping. More importantly, when I discreetly photographed his license plate and ran those numbers, the truck came back as registered to a Thomas Brennan, not Bradley. The registration address was in Williston, North Dakota, which was one of the locations where a missing woman had last been seen. I returned to the vehicles and told Jessica that a tow truck was on the way, but I needed to speak with her privately for a moment. When we were out of Tom's hearing range, I quietly asked her how long he had been there helping her. "Maybe 10 minutes before you arrived," she said. But that's the weird thing. When he first stopped, he seemed to know a lot about my car problems before even looking under the hood. It was like he already knew what was wrong with it. That detail sent chills down my spine. I asked Jessica to stay close to my patrol car while I spoke with Tom again. But when I turned around, he was already walking quickly back toward his truck. "Tom, can I speak with you for another moment?" I called out, but he kept walking. "Sir, I need you to stop, please." Instead of complying, he broke into a run toward his pickup truck. I immediately called for backup and pursued him on foot, but he reached his vehicle and sped away before I could apprehend him. As he drove past us, I got a clear look at the inside of his truck, and what I saw confirmed my worst fears. The newspaper clippings taped to his rear window were articles about the missing women. The maps in his truck bed were marked with red circles around the locations where each woman had disappeared, along with what appeared to be dates and times. There were also photographs, dozens of them, seemingly candid shots of young women taken without their knowledge. I immediately radioed for all available units to assist in stopping Tom Bradley's vehicle, providing his description and license plate number. I also requested that investigators respond to the scene to examine Jessica's car for any evidence of tampering. What they found was deeply disturbing. Jessica's car had been deliberately sabotaged. Someone had loosened her alternator belt and disconnected her battery cables in a way that would cause the car to die after driving for a short distance. The work had been done recently, within the last day or two, suggesting that someone had targeted her vehicle while it was parked, possibly at her parents' house or during a stop along her route. Even more troubling was the discovery that Tom Bradley had detailed knowledge about Jessica's travel plans. When investigators interviewed her parents, they learned that Jessica's route and timing had been discussed on her social media accounts, which were public. Someone had been monitoring her online activity and used that information to sabotage her car at a location where she would be stranded and vulnerable. The search for Tom Bradley, or Thomas Brennan as his truck was registered, led to a massive multi-state investigation. When law enforcement finally located his residence in North Dakota, they found a disturbing collection of evidence linking him to at least 3 of the missing women cases. His house contained detailed surveillance photos, travel logs, and maps showing patterns of movement that matched the disappearances. However, Tom himself was never found. His truck was discovered abandoned at a rest stop near the Canadian border. But despite extensive searches on both sides of the border, he vanished without a trace. The FBI took over the case and classified him as a person of interest in multiple missing person investigations across the Northern Plains states. Jessica Morrison was incredibly lucky. If I hadn't arrived when I did, she almost certainly would have become another victim. The investigation revealed that Tom's method of operation involved identifying potential victims through social media, sabotaging their vehicles in remote locations, then appearing as a helpful Good Samaritan when they broke down. He had likely been perfecting this technique for years. This case fundamentally changed how I approach roadside assistance calls. Now I always run background checks on any civilians present at the scene, and I trust my instincts when something feels wrong about a situation. The idea that predators might use our natural inclination to help stranded motorists as a hunting ground was something that had never occurred to me before this incident. I was eventually transferred to a different district at my own request, partly to get away from the stretch of highway where this happened, but mostly because I could never shake the feeling that Tom Bradley might return to the area. The fact that he was never captured means he could still be out there somewhere, still targeting young women, still pretending to be a helpful stranger. Sometimes I wonder how many other officers have encountered similar situations without recognizing the danger. How many potential victims might have been saved if we were more aware of this type of predatory behavior. The case remains open, and I still check the bulletins regularly, hoping that someday Tom Bradley will be caught and the families of his victims will get the answers they deserve. My name is Deputy Kaisan, and I've been with the Nevada County Sheriff's Department for 11 years. For most of that time, I worked the overnight shift patrolling some of the most remote and desolate areas in the state. Nevada has a reputation for strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena. But I always prided myself on being a rational, by-the-books officer who could find logical explanations for even the most unusual situations. That confidence was completely shattered on May 17, 2021, when I responded to what should have been a routine investigation of suspicious lights and sounds, but instead discovered something so inexplicable that it led me to refuse all overnight assignments and eventually file for early retirement. It was 2:45 in the morning on a clear, moonless night in central Nevada. I was patrolling State Route 375, which locals call the extraterrestrial highway due to its proximity to Area 51 and the numerous UFO sightings reported in the area over the years. Most of us in law enforcement treat those reports with healthy skepticism. But the nickname has stuck, and it certainly adds to the eerie atmosphere when you're driving those empty roads in the middle of the night. I had been on duty since 10 p.m. and was about halfway through my shift when dispatch called with an unusual report. Unit 15. We've received multiple calls about strange lights and sounds on Route 375, approximately 10 miles north of the Alamo Junction. Callers report seeing unusual illumination and hearing mechanical noises that don't match typical aircraft or vehicle sounds. Can you respond and investigate? I acknowledged the call and headed toward the reported location. Route 375 in that area is about as isolated as you can get in America, cutting through flat desert terrain with nothing but sagebrush and distant mountains visible in any direction. During daylight hours, you might see a few tourists or UFO enthusiasts. But at nearly 3 a.m., the road is typically completely deserted. As I drove north from Alamo, I kept scanning the horizon for any signs of unusual lights or activity. The desert night was perfectly clear, with excellent visibility under the starlight. but I saw nothing out of the ordinary for the first several miles. I was beginning to think the reports might have been false alarms or misidentified aircraft when I crested a small rise and saw something that made me immediately pull over and call for backup. Spread out across both lanes of the highway ahead of me was a line of abandoned vehicles that stretched as far as I could see in my headlights. Cars, trucks, RVs, motorcycles, all sitting motionless in the middle of the road with their doors open and engines running. The scene looked like something out of a disaster movie, as if every vehicle on the highway had suddenly stopped, and their occupants had simply vanished into thin air. I approached the scene cautiously, activating my emergency lights and calling in a detailed description to dispatch. Unit 15. I've got multiple abandoned vehicles blocking Route 375 at mile marker 47. Appears to be at least 20 vehicles, possibly more, all with doors open and engines running. No sign of any occupants. Requesting immediate backup and supervisor response. The first vehicle in the line was a red pickup truck with Texas plates. The driver's door was wide open, keys still in the ignition, engine idling smoothly. The radio was playing softly, tuned to a classic rock station. On the passenger seat was a half-eaten sandwich and an open bottle of water that was still cold to the touch. Personal belongings were scattered throughout the cab, including a wallet, cell phone, and what appeared to be travel documents. I moved to the next vehicle, a blue sedan with California plates, and found the same scenario. Engine running, doors open, personal belongings left behind, as if the occupants had simply stepped out momentarily. The pattern continued as I worked my way down the line of abandoned vehicles. Each one told the same story of sudden, inexplicable abandonment. What made the scene even more disturbing was the positioning of the vehicles. They weren't scattered randomly or showing signs of panic or collision. Instead, they were arranged in an almost perfect line down the center of the highway, spaced about 10 to 15 feet apart, as if they had all stopped in an orderly fashion and their occupants had simply walked away. Some vehicles had their hazard lights flashing, others didn't, but all had their engines running and doors open. As I continued my examination, I counted 27 vehicles in total, spanning nearly 2 miles of highway. The makes and models varied widely, from economy cars to luxury SUVs to motorcycles, suggesting they weren't part of any organized convoy or group. License plates showed registrations from 12 different states, indicating these were individual travelers who had been heading in both directions on the highway when whatever happened occurred. I called dispatch again to request additional units and specialized investigative teams. Unit 15, I need crime scene investigators, hazmat teams, and federal notification. This scene is unlike anything I've encountered. 27 abandoned vehicles, no sign of occupants, no indication of what caused them to stop. While waiting for backup, I began documenting the scene more thoroughly. In each vehicle, I found evidence of recent occupation. Cell phones with recent call logs, GPS devices showing active navigation, food and drinks that were still fresh, and personal items that suggested people had been in the middle of long-distance travel. Several vehicles contained luggage and camping equipment, indicating their occupants had been on vacation or extended trips. One RV particularly caught my attention because its door was not only open, but the steps were deployed, as if someone had been in the process of exiting the vehicle. Inside, I found a family's worth of belongings scattered throughout, including children's toys and clothing. The refrigerator was still running, and there was a pot of coffee that was still warm on the stove. Whatever had caused this family to abandon their RV had happened very recently. Even more puzzling was the complete absence of footprints or any trace of where the occupants might have gone. The desert floor around the highway showed no signs of disturbance. No tracks leading away from the vehicles. Nothing to indicate which direction people might have walked. It was as if all the occupants had simply vanished without ever touching the ground outside their vehicles. When backup finally arrived, including my supervisor and a team of investigators from the state police, they were as baffled by the scene as I was. We expanded our search area to cover several square miles around the abandoned vehicles, using helicopters with thermal imaging and search dogs, but found no trace of any of the missing people. The investigation that followed involved multiple federal agencies and lasted several weeks. Every vehicle was processed for evidence, and extensive background checks were conducted on all the registered owners. What they found was that the vehicles belonged to ordinary people from across the country who had been traveling through Nevada for various legitimate reasons. Families on vacation, business travelers, long-haul truckers, retirees in RVs, all different types of people with no apparent connection to each other. Most disturbing was the timeline that investigators were able to establish. Based on cell phone records, credit card transactions, and security camera footage from gas stations, they determined that all 27 vehicles had passed through the same area of Route 375 within a 45-minute window between 1:30 and 2:15 a.m. Whatever had caused them to stop and their occupants to disappear had happened during that narrow time frame. The last electronic activity from any of the missing people occurred at 2:17 a.m., when one of the cell phones automatically sent a routine software update confirmation to its service provider. After that time, all electronic communication from the 27 missing individuals ceased completely. No phone calls, no text messages, no credit card transactions, no social media activity. It was as if all of them had simultaneously stopped existing. Federal agencies took over the investigation and classified most of the details. But I was present during the initial evidence collection and saw things that still haunt me. In several of the vehicles, investigators found what appeared to be trace amounts of an unknown substance that couldn't be identified by any laboratory analysis. The substance was described as having properties that didn't match any known material, and samples were sent to specialized facilities for further study. Even more unsettling were the electronic anomalies found in the vehicles. Every GPS device, cell phone, and electronic system showed signs of interference that occurred at exactly 2:17 a.m. The interference pattern was unlike anything caused by known sources like solar flares or electromagnetic pulses, and electronics experts couldn't explain what could have caused such widespread simultaneous disruption. I was placed on administrative leave during the investigation and underwent extensive debriefing by federal agents who seemed more interested in what I might have seen or heard than in getting my account of what I had found. They repeatedly asked about any unusual lights, sounds, or aircraft in the area. Questions that made me think they suspected this incident might be connected to the military installations in the region. The case was eventually closed with no explanation provided to local law enforcement or the families of the missing people. The vehicles were returned to their owners' families, but the 27 individuals who had been driving them were never found. They were officially classified as missing persons, but the investigation was terminated and the case files were sealed. The experience fundamentally changed my perspective on law enforcement and what we might encounter in the field. I requested transfer to day shifts and avoided working in remote areas whenever possible. The idea that 27 people could simply vanish simultaneously from a stretch of highway, leaving no trace and no explanation, challenged everything I thought I knew about reality. I retired from the sheriff's department 2 years later, unable to shake the memory of that scene and the questions it raised. Sometimes I still drive past that stretch of Route 375 during daylight hours, and I always slow down near mile marker 47. wondering if whatever caused those people to disappear might still be active in the area. The highway looks normal during the day, just another empty stretch of Nevada desert. But I know that something impossible happened there on that May night, something that defied every natural law I understand. The families of the missing people deserve answers that they'll probably never get. And the thought that there might be forces or phenomena operating in our world that can cause people to vanish without a trace is something that changed how I view everything around me. Some mysteries are too big and too strange for local law enforcement to handle. And sometimes, the only thing you can do is file your report and try to forget what you've seen. My name is Trooper Azariah, and I've been with the Colorado State Patrol for 7 years. Colorado's mountain highways present unique challenges, especially during winter months when blizzards can create whiteout conditions and turn routine drives into life-threatening ordeals. I've responded to countless weather-related accidents, from minor fender benders to multi-vehicle pileups that required hours of rescue operations. I thought I had seen every type of winter emergency scenario possible until January 15th, 2020, when I responded to what appeared to be a standard multi-vehicle accident during a severe snowstorm, but discovered something that defied logical explanation and left me with severe anxiety about mountain driving that persists to this day. It was about 9:30 p.m. during one of the worst blizzards I had ever worked in. Highway 50 through the Colorado mountain passes was experiencing near-zero visibility, with snow falling at a rate of 3 inches per hour and winds gusting up to 50 miles per hour. The temperature had dropped to -8 degrees, creating dangerously slick road conditions. We had already responded to 6 weather-related accidents that evening, and the state was considering closing the highway entirely until the storm passed. I was stationed at the Monarch Pass area when dispatch called with another accident report. Unit 31. We've got a multi-vehicle accident on westbound Highway 50 at mile marker 198. Initial reports suggest at least 3 vehicles involved, possible injuries, and 1 vehicle may have gone over the guardrail. EMTs are responding, but the storm is slowing their response time. Mile marker 198 was in one of the most treacherous sections of the mountain pass, where the highway curves around steep drops into deep ravines. During normal conditions, it's a challenging stretch of road that requires careful attention. In a blizzard with whiteout conditions, it becomes extremely dangerous, and accidents in that area often result in serious injuries or fatalities. I made my way carefully toward the accident scene, traveling at about 20 miles per hour due to the limited visibility. The snow was so heavy that my headlights only illuminated about 15 feet ahead of the patrol car, and the wind was creating drifting snow that constantly changed the road conditions. It took me nearly 20 minutes to cover the 8 miles to mile marker 198. When I finally reached the accident scene, my emergency lights illuminated a chaotic situation. There were 4 vehicles involved, not 3 as initially reported. A small sedan had rear-ended a pickup truck, which had then collided with an SUV. The 4th vehicle, a compact car, had indeed gone through the guardrail and was precariously positioned on the steep embankment below, held in place only by a cluster of pine trees. I immediately assessed the situation and began coordinating rescue efforts. The occupants of the 3 vehicles on the roadway appeared to be conscious and mobile, though clearly shaken by the accident. The real concern was the compact car that had gone over the guardrail. I could see movement inside the vehicle, indicating there were survivors, but the car's position made any rescue attempt extremely dangerous. As I worked to secure the accident scene and coordinate with emergency responders, I began interviewing the survivors to understand what had happened. The driver of the sedan, a middle-aged man named Robert Chen, told me he had been following the pickup truck when they both suddenly encountered a line of vehicles stopped in the roadway ahead of them. He said there were at least 6 or 7 cars and trucks completely blocking both lanes, all with their hazard lights flashing. I tried to stop, but the roads were so icy. Robert explained, his voice shaking from cold and shock. The pickup truck in front of me managed to slow down, but I couldn't stop in time and rear-ended him. That pushed him into the SUV, and somehow the little car ended up going over the side. The pickup truck driver, Maria Santos, confirmed Robert's account. There were definitely other vehicles blocking the road, she said. That's why we all had to stop so suddenly. I saw at least 5 or 6 cars ahead of us, all stopped with their emergency lights on. I thought maybe there had been another accident ahead of us. But as I looked around the accident scene, I could only see the 4 vehicles that were directly involved in the collision. There were no other cars or trucks anywhere in the area, no tire tracks in the snow to indicate that other vehicles had been present, and no evidence of any obstruction that would have caused traffic to stop. I asked both drivers to describe the vehicles they claimed to have seen blocking the road. Their descriptions were detailed and consistent with each other. Robert described seeing a white van, a red pickup truck, a blue sedan, and what appeared to be a large RV or motorhome. Maria provided similar descriptions, adding that she had seen people standing outside some of the vehicles, as if they were assessing damage from their own accident. There was a woman in a yellow coat standing by one of the cars, Maria insisted. She was waving at us, trying to warn us to slow down. That's when I realized we were approaching stopped traffic. The driver of the SUV, an elderly man named George Patterson, also confirmed seeing the stopped vehicles ahead of them. I was in the back of the line, he said. When I saw all those cars stopped ahead, I tried to warn the vehicles behind me by flashing my lights. But the visibility was so poor that I don't think they could see my signals in time. Even more puzzling was the account from the occupants of the compact car that had gone over the guardrail. When rescue workers finally managed to extract them from their precarious position, both the driver and passenger insisted that they had been trying to maneuver around a large motorhome that was blocking their lane when they lost control and went through the guardrail. It was a big white RV, said the driver, a young woman named Jessica Torres. It was stopped sideways across both lanes, completely blocking the road. We were trying to go around it when we hit the ice and went over the side. I conducted a thorough examination of the accident scene, looking for any evidence of the additional vehicles that all 4 drivers claimed to have seen. The fresh snow should have preserved tire tracks, footprints, or other signs of their presence, but I found nothing. The only tracks in the snow were from the 4 vehicles that were actually involved in the collision. Emergency responders who arrived shortly after me were equally puzzled by the survivors' accounts. The ambulance crew, fire department personnel, and tow truck operators all confirmed that there were no other vehicles in the area, and no evidence that any had been present during the accident. When accident reconstruction specialists examined the scene the following day, they found physical evidence that contradicted the survivors' stories. The pattern of damage to the vehicles, the positions where they came to rest, and the physics of the collision all indicated that the accident had been caused by the sedan rear-ending the pickup truck due to icy conditions and poor visibility. There was no physical evidence to support the claim that the vehicles had been trying to avoid stopped traffic ahead of them. Yet all 5 survivors, from 4 different vehicles, maintained identical stories about seeing multiple stopped vehicles blocking the highway. They described the same white van, red pickup truck, blue sedan, and motorhome. They all mentioned seeing people standing outside the vehicles, and several specifically remembered the woman in the yellow coat who had been trying to warn approaching traffic. The psychological evaluation that followed suggested that the survivors might have experienced a shared hallucination brought on by the extreme stress of driving in dangerous conditions combined with the trauma of the accident itself. The psychologist explained that in high-stress situations, especially those involving sensory deprivation like whiteout conditions, multiple people can sometimes experience similar visual hallucinations. But the consistency and detail of their accounts troubled me. These weren't vague impressions or fleeting glimpses of something in the snow. All 5 survivors provided detailed, specific descriptions of vehicles and people that matched each other perfectly. They remembered license plate numbers, described the clothing worn by the people they saw, and recalled specific details about the positions and conditions of the stopped vehicles. What disturbed me most was a discovery made several days later when I was reviewing accident reports from that stretch of highway. Over the previous 5 years, there had been 6 other multi-vehicle accidents at or near mile marker 198 during severe weather conditions. In each case, survivors had reported seeing stopped vehicles blocking the highway that were never found at the scene. The descriptions were remarkably consistent across all the different accidents. Multiple witnesses from different years described the same white van, red pickup truck, blue sedan, and motorhome. Several mentioned seeing a woman in a yellow coat standing beside one of the vehicles. The accounts were so similar that it seemed impossible they could all be coincidental hallucinations. I began to suspect that whatever had caused the survivors to see these phantom vehicles might be connected to previous accidents at the same location. Perhaps the traumatic events that had occurred at mile marker 198 over the years had somehow left an imprint that became visible to people under extreme stress during similar weather conditions. The case was officially closed as a weather-related accident caused by icy road conditions and poor visibility. The insurance companies accepted the findings, and the survivors eventually recovered from their injuries. But I was never able to forget the consistency of their accounts or shake the feeling that there was something more to what had happened that night. I developed severe anxiety about responding to mountain accidents during winter storms, especially in areas where previous fatalities had occurred. The idea that traumatic events might somehow replay themselves under certain conditions, becoming visible to people who find themselves in similar situations, fundamentally changed how I view accident scenes. I eventually requested a transfer to lower elevation assignments and now avoid mountain highway patrol during severe weather whenever possible. Sometimes, when I'm driving through mountain passes during snowstorms, I find myself looking for signs of stopped vehicles ahead, wondering if I might someday see the white van, red pickup truck, blue sedan, and motorhome that have appeared to so many accident victims over the years. The survivors of that January night accident all moved away from Colorado within the following year, and several mentioned in their statements that they continue to see the stopped vehicles in their dreams. Whatever they experienced during that blizzard at mile marker 198 was real enough to them that it changed their lives permanently. And I can't help but wonder if those phantom vehicles are still out there, still trying to warn approaching drivers about dangers they can no longer avoid. My name is Sergeant Jeffrey Reeves, and I've been with the Arizona Department of Public Safety for 18 years. In that time, I've conducted thousands of traffic stops across some of the most desolate stretches of highway in America. The Arizona desert can be unforgiving, but it's also predictable in its own way. You learn to expect certain types of drivers, certain kinds of problems, and you develop instincts about when something isn't quite right. Those instincts served me well for nearly 2 decades. Until November 8th, 2019. When what started as a routine traffic stop turned into something so disturbing and impossible that it led to an extended leave of absence and ongoing therapy sessions that continue to this day. It was about 4:45 in the morning, just before dawn, and I was patrolling Interstate 10 in the stretch between Phoenix and Tucson. This is a busy corridor, even in the early morning hours, with long-haul truckers and early commuters making their way across the desert. The temperature was cool for November in Arizona, probably in the mid-50s, and visibility was excellent under the clear desert sky. I had just passed mile marker 164 when dispatch came over the radio with a BOLO alert that caught my attention. All units, be on the lookout for a silver Toyota Camry, Arizona plates Charlie Victor Mike 749, wanted in connection with a missing person case out of Flagstaff. Vehicle may be traveling southbound on I-17 or I-10. Occupant should be considered potentially dangerous. About 20 minutes later, I spotted a vehicle matching the description in my rearview mirror, approaching at a high rate of speed. As it passed me, I confirmed it was indeed a silver Toyota Camry with the exact license plate number from the BOLO. I activated my emergency lights and initiated a traffic stop, calling it in to dispatch as I pulled the vehicle over to the shoulder. The Camry complied immediately, pulling over in a safe location away from traffic. I approached the vehicle using standard procedures, observing that there appeared to be two occupants, a driver and passenger, both appearing to be middle-aged males. As I reached the driver's side window, the driver rolled it down and looked up at me with what seemed like genuine confusion. "Good morning, sir. I'm Sergeant Reeves with the Arizona Department of Public Safety. I stopped your vehicle because it matches the description of a car we're looking for in connection with an ongoing investigation. Can I see your driver's license and registration, please?" The driver reached into his wallet and handed me a valid Arizona driver's license in the name of David Morrison, age 43, with a Flagstaff address. The photo on the license clearly matched the man sitting in front of me. He appeared calm and cooperative, showing none of the nervous behavior I typically see from people who know they're wanted by law enforcement. "Mr. Morrison, are you aware that your vehicle has been reported in connection with a missing person investigation?" I asked, studying his reaction carefully. He looked genuinely puzzled by my question. "I'm sorry, officer, but I think there might be some mistake. I haven't been involved in any missing person case. My passenger and I are just driving down to Tucson for a business meeting." I asked to see identification from the passenger, who produced a driver's license identifying him as David Morrison, age 43, with the same Flagstaff address. At first, I thought it might be a fake ID, or that one of them was using someone else's license. But when I examined both licenses more carefully, they appeared to be genuine Arizona DMV documents, both with the same name, address, and date of birth, but with clearly different photographs. "Gentlemen, I'm going to need both of you to step out of the vehicle," I said, my hand instinctively moving closer to my service weapon. Something was very wrong with this situation, and I needed to assess what I was dealing with. Both men complied without resistance, and as they stood beside their vehicle, I was struck by something even more disturbing. They were identical in every physical aspect. Not just similar, but completely identical. Same height, same weight, same facial features, same clothing, same mannerisms. It was like looking at the same person twice, standing side by side in the Arizona desert. I called for backup and ran both driver's licenses through our database. What came back was impossible to explain rationally. Both licenses were valid. Both were issued to David Morrison at the same address in Flagstaff. But according to DMV records, there was only one David Morrison with that information in the system. Yet I was looking at two identical men, each with what appeared to be legitimate identification bearing the same personal information. "Which one of you is David Morrison?" I asked, though I realized how absurd the question sounded, even as I spoke it. Both men answered simultaneously, I am. They spoke in unison, with identical voices, identical intonation, and identical expressions of confusion about why I was asking such an obvious question. I separated them and began questioning each one individually, trying to establish their identities and determine what was happening. When I asked the first David Morrison about his personal history, he provided detailed information about growing up in Flagstaff, graduating from Northern Arizona University, working as an insurance adjuster, and living at the address on his driver's license for the past 8 years. When I questioned the second David Morrison, he provided exactly the same information, with identical details about childhood memories, education, work history, and personal relationships. They both knew the names of the same friends, remembered the same events from their past, and described the same daily routines and habits. Even more unsettling was when I asked each of them about the other person. Both David Morrisons insisted that the other person was not David Morrison, that they had never seen him before, and that there must be some kind of mistake or impersonation occurring. Each one was convinced that he was the real David Morrison, and that the other person was somehow an imposter. Backup arrived while I was conducting these interviews, and Officer Martinez immediately noticed the impossible similarity between the two men. "Reeves, what the hell is going on here? Are these guys twins or something?" I explained the situation, and Martinez ran the license plates and registration independently, confirming that the vehicle was registered to David Morrison at the Flagstaff address. But when we contacted the Flagstaff Police Department about the missing person case that had generated the BOLO alert, we learned something that made the situation even more bizarre. According to Detective Williams in Flagstaff, David Morrison had been reported missing by his employer 3 days earlier when he failed to show up for work and couldn't be reached by phone. His car was missing from his apartment complex parking lot, and his neighbors hadn't seen him since the previous weekend. The missing person report had been filed because this was completely out of character for Morrison, who was described as reliable and responsible. But I was standing in the Arizona desert looking at two people who both claimed to be the missing David Morrison, both with valid identification, both with detailed knowledge of his life and personal history. The detective in Flagstaff was baffled when I described the situation, and he requested that we detain both individuals until he could drive down to sort out the confusion. While waiting for the detective to arrive, I continued interviewing both David Morrisons, trying to find some discrepancy in their stories that might explain what was happening. But their accounts remained perfectly consistent with each other and with the information that had been provided by the missing person report. They both remembered the same events from the past week, including details that hadn't been included in the official report. When Detective Williams finally arrived from Flagstaff, he was visibly shaken by what he saw. "This is impossible," he said after examining both men and their identification. "I've known David Morrison for 5 years. I've worked with him on insurance investigations, had coffee with him, been to his apartment. But I'm looking at two people who are both clearly the David Morrison I know." The detective attempted to resolve the situation by asking questions that only the real David Morrison would know. Details from his personal life and work history that wouldn't be public knowledge. Both men answered every question correctly, with intimate knowledge of Morrison's life, relationships, and experiences. DNA testing was ordered to try to determine if the two men were related, but the results were inconclusive. The laboratory reported that the samples were so similar that their equipment couldn't distinguish between them, which the technician said was scientifically impossible unless the samples had been mislabeled or contaminated. Fingerprinting produced equally puzzling results. Both men had identical fingerprints that matched David Morrison's prints on file with the state DMV and insurance licensing board. Again, the technician said this was impossible, as no two people can have identical fingerprints. not even identical twins. The psychological evaluation that followed was conducted by a team of specialists who were brought in specifically to assess this unprecedented situation. Both David Morrisons underwent extensive testing, including detailed interviews about their memories, personality assessments, and cognitive evaluations. The results showed that both men had identical psychological profiles, identical memory patterns, and identical responses to psychological stimuli. After 2 weeks of investigation, during which both men remained in custody while specialists tried to determine their identities, the case was quietly closed without resolution. Both individuals were released, but with the stipulation that they could not both continue to use the same identity documents. One was allowed to retain his original identification, while the other was issued temporary documents under the name John Doe, until a new identity could be established. The case file was sealed, and all personnel involved were required to sign non-disclosure agreements. I was placed on administrative leave and underwent psychological counseling to help process what I had witnessed. The official explanation was that one of the individuals was an elaborate impersonator who had somehow obtained fraudulent but convincing identification. But this explanation didn't account for the identical DNA and fingerprints. I never learned what happened to either David Morrison after their release, and attempts to follow up on the case were blocked by department administrators. The incident fundamentally changed my understanding of identity and reality, raising questions about the nature of human consciousness and the possibility that the same person might somehow exist in multiple forms simultaneously. I returned to duty after several months, but I was never quite the same. Every traffic stop now carries the possibility that I might encounter something that challenges the basic assumptions about reality that I've always taken for granted. The idea that there might be forces or phenomena at work in our world that can duplicate human beings completely, down to their memories and physical characteristics, is something that haunts every interaction I have with the public. Sometimes I wonder if both David Morrisons were real. If somehow the same consciousness had been split into two identical physical forms, or if I had witnessed some kind of supernatural duplication that science can't explain. The case remains the most disturbing experience of my law enforcement career, and it's something that I still struggle to understand years later. My name is Trooper Zayden, and I've been with the Kansas Highway Patrol for 13 years. In that time, I've responded to every type of call you can imagine at truck stops along Interstate 70. These places can be rough, with their own unique set of problems ranging from drug trafficking to human smuggling, to simple disputes between drivers who've been on the road too long. I thought I had seen the worst that truck stop culture could offer until April 3, 2021, when I responded to what should have been a routine disturbance call, but instead discovered something so profoundly disturbing that it led to my transfer to administrative duties and ongoing counseling that continues to this day. It was 3:30 in the morning on a cold April night, and I was patrolling the stretch of I-70 that runs through central Kansas. The temperature had dropped to about 35 degrees, and a light rain was making the road slick and treacherous. Most of the truck stops along my route were quiet at that hour, with drivers either sleeping in their cabs or grabbing quick meals before continuing their long hauls across the country. I was about 5 miles east of Salina when dispatch called with an unusual report. Unit 18, we need you to respond to a disturbance at the Flying J truck stop at exit 252. Multiple calls about screaming coming from one of the parked semi-trailers. Complainants say it sounds like someone might be in distress or danger. I acknowledged the call and headed toward the truck stop. Exit 252 was home to one of the busiest truck stops on I-70, a massive complex with dozens of parking spaces for semis, multiple fuel islands, a restaurant, and various services for long-haul drivers. Even at 3:30 a.m., there were usually 20 to 30 trucks parked there, with drivers taking their mandatory rest breaks or waiting for morning delivery appointments. When I arrived at the Flying J, I could see that the parking area was about half full, with semis scattered throughout the lot in the typical random pattern of drivers choosing spots based on convenience and availability. I parked near the main building and approached the night manager, who had been the one to call in the disturbance. "Officer, thank God you're here," said the manager, a middle-aged man named Carl who looked genuinely shaken. "It started about 20 minutes ago. There's this terrible screaming coming from somewhere in the back of the lot. It sounds like someone's being tortured or killed. I've never heard anything like it." Carl led me toward the rear section of the parking area, where the older and more isolated parking spaces were located. As we walked, I could hear what he was talking about. There was indeed screaming coming from somewhere ahead of us. But it wasn't the kind of screaming you'd expect from someone being attacked or injured. It was more methodical, almost rhythmic, like someone following a script or pattern. "Which truck is it coming from?" I asked, scanning the vehicles in the back section of the lot. "That's the weird thing," Carl replied. "It seems to be coming from that red Peterbilt over there. But when I went over to check on it earlier, the trailer looked completely empty. No lights on inside, no movement. Nothing to suggest anyone was in there. But the screaming definitely seems to be coming from that direction." I approached the red Peterbilt cautiously, calling out to identify myself as law enforcement. "Kansas Highway Patrol. Is anyone in need of assistance?" The screaming stopped immediately when I called out, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow more unsettling than the noise had been. I walked around the entire rig, checking for signs of occupancy or distress. The cab appeared to be empty, with no lights on, and the curtains drawn across the sleeper compartment windows. The trailer was a standard enclosed cargo unit with no external markings to indicate what company it belonged to or what it might be carrying. As I completed my circuit around the truck, the screaming started again, and this time I could definitely confirm it was coming from inside the trailer. But it wasn't random screaming. As I listened more carefully, I realized there were multiple voices, and they seemed to be following some kind of pattern or sequence. It was almost like listening to a recording of multiple people screaming in terror, but played back in an organized, systematic way. I tried to open the trailer doors, but they were secured with a heavy-duty padlock. I called for backup and requested that someone contact the truck's stop office to see if they had any information about who owned or was operating the red Peterbilt. While waiting for assistance, I continued to monitor the situation, and what I heard became increasingly disturbing. The voices inside the trailer weren't just screaming randomly. They were screaming specific words and phrases, things like, "Please don't," and "Help me," and "I want to go home." Even more unsettling was that some of the voices sounded like children, while others were clearly adult men and women. It was as if someone had recorded the final moments of multiple victims and was playing them back in sequence. When backup arrived, Officer Martinez brought bolt cutters to remove the padlock on the trailer doors. As we prepared to open the trailer, I called for additional units and requested that crime scene investigators be placed on standby. Whatever was inside that trailer, I had a sinking feeling it was going to be something that would require extensive investigation. We cut the lock and pulled open the trailer doors, and what we found inside defied comprehension. The trailer had been converted into what appeared to be a series of detailed crime scene recreations. There were multiple sections, each one set up to represent different locations where violent crimes had taken place. Hotel rooms, basements, wooded areas, parking garages, all meticulously recreated with authentic-looking props and furnishings. But the most disturbing aspect wasn't the recreated crime scenes themselves, but the level of accuracy and detail that had gone into creating them. Each scene included evidence markers, police tape, chalk outlines, and other details that would only be known to law enforcement investigators. There were photographs pinned to walls showing actual crime scene photos that had never been released to the public, along with case files and investigation documents. In the center of the trailer was a sophisticated audio system connected to speakers throughout the different sections. The system was playing recordings of what sounded like actual victim testimonies, emergency calls, and interrogation sessions. The voices we had heard screaming were coming from this system, but the recordings contained information about specific crimes that had never been made public. One section of the trailer was set up to recreate the bedroom of a young woman who had been murdered in Topeka 3 years earlier. The details were perfect, down to the color of the bedspread and the position of furniture. Even more disturbing was that the scene included evidence that had been kept confidential during the investigation, details that only the killer and the investigating officers would have known. Another section recreated the basement where a serial killer in Missouri had tortured and killed multiple victims over a 2-year period. Again, the accuracy was unsettling, including details about the killer's methods and the layout of the crime scene that had never been released to the media or discussed publicly. As we explored the trailer more thoroughly, we found that it contained recreations of at least 12 different crime scenes from unsolved murders across Kansas, Missouri, Colorado, and Nebraska. Each scene was accompanied by detailed case files, crime scene photographs, and audio recordings that appeared to be authentic police evidence. The investigation that followed involved multiple law enforcement agencies and took several months to complete. The trailer was registered to a trucking company that had gone out of business 2 years earlier, and attempts to trace its recent ownership led to a series of shell companies and false identities that investigators were never able to unravel. Even more disturbing was the discovery that many of the audio recordings found in the trailer contained information about the crimes that wasn't in any official police files. The recordings included details about the victims' final moments, descriptions of the killer's methods, and other information that could only have come from someone who was present during the crimes or had access to evidence that had never been documented. FBI analysts who examined the audio recordings confirmed that they were authentic, not fabricated or edited. The voices matched known recordings of several victims, and the background sounds and ambient noise were consistent with the actual crime scenes. But there was no explanation for how someone could have obtained these recordings, or why they would create such elaborate recreations of the crime scenes. The most unsettling discovery came when investigators realized that several of the recreated crime scenes corresponded to murders that were still under active investigation. The trailer contained accurate details about recent crimes that had not yet been solved, including information that suggested the creator had intimate knowledge of ongoing investigations. One section of the trailer was devoted to a murder that had occurred in Denver just 2 weeks before the truck stop incident. The recreation included crime scene photos, evidence lists, and witness statements that matched the actual investigation files perfectly. The problem was that this information should have been available only to the Denver Police Department and FBI investigators working the case. When investigators contacted the Denver Police Department, they discovered that someone had been systematically accessing their case files and evidence databases using legitimate law enforcement credentials. The access logs showed that the information had been downloaded by someone with proper authorization, but the identity of that person was never established. Similar security breaches were discovered in police departments across multiple states, all involving the specific cases that were recreated in the trailer. Someone with extensive law enforcement connections had been systematically gathering confidential information about unsolved murders and using it to create detailed recreations of the crime scenes. The case was eventually taken over by federal authorities and classified as an ongoing investigation into potential law enforcement corruption and evidence tampering. The trailer and all its contents were seized and removed to a secure facility for further analysis. All officers involved in the initial discovery were required to sign non-disclosure agreements and undergo extensive background checks. I was transferred to administrative duties pending the completion of the investigation, during which time I underwent psychological evaluation and counseling. The experience of discovering those crime scene recreations, complete with authentic victim recordings and confidential evidence, fundamentally changed my perspective on law enforcement and the potential for corruption within our own ranks. The investigation never reached any public conclusions, and I was never informed about whether any arrests were made or whether the person responsible for creating the trailer was identified. The case file remains classified, and attempts to follow up on the investigation have been blocked by federal authorities. What disturbs me most about the incident isn't just the macabre nature of what we found, but the implications about how someone could have obtained such detailed information about active murder investigations. The level of access required to gather that evidence suggests involvement by someone within law enforcement, someone who used their position to compile information about the most brutal and disturbing crimes in multiple states. I continue to work in an administrative capacity, but the incident has left me with profound questions about the integrity of our investigative systems and the possibility that there are people within law enforcement who may be using their access to sensitive information for purposes that go far beyond legitimate police work. The thought that someone might be out there collecting details about unsolved murders and recreating crime scenes for unknown purposes is something that continues to haunt my sleep and influence every aspect of my work. This final story comes to us not from the officer who experienced it, but from his partner, because Trooper Kenzo Hayes never made it home from his last shift. My name is Detective Lenora Park, and I was Kenzo's partner for the final 3 years of his 25-year career with the Utah Highway Patrol. What I'm about to share with you is the most disturbing case I've ever encountered. Not just because of what happened to Kenzo, but because of what his final radio transmission revealed about the nature of the forces that might be operating on our most isolated highways. December 21st, 2021, was supposed to be Kenzo's final shift before retirement. After 25 years of faithful service, he was just 8 hours away from turning in his badge and spending Christmas with his grandchildren. He had chosen to work one last overnight patrol on Highway 6, a desolate stretch of road that cuts through the Utah desert, because he said he wanted to end his career where it had begun, helping stranded motorists and keeping travelers safe on the loneliest roads in America. Kenzo was 58 years old and had seen everything the job could throw at him. Multiple vehicle accidents, drug busts, domestic violence calls, high-speed pursuits, and more tragedy than most people witness in several lifetimes. He was the kind of officer younger troopers looked up to, a mentor who had trained dozens of new recruits and earned the respect of everyone in the department. If Kenzo Hayes said something was wrong, you listened, because his instincts had been honed by more than 2 decades of experience. I was working dispatch that night, covering for a colleague who had called in sick, so I was the one monitoring Kenzo's radio communications during his final shift. It should have been a routine night, the kind of quiet patrol that would give him time to reflect on his career and look forward to his retirement. The weather was clear, traffic was light, and Highway 6 was peaceful in the way that only the Utah desert can be at 2 a.m. on a winter night. Kenzo's first few hours on patrol were completely normal. He conducted a couple of routine traffic stops, assisted a stranded motorist with a flat tire, and made his regular check-ins with dispatch right on schedule. His voice over the radio was relaxed and cheerful, occasionally making jokes about how he was going to miss the excitement of chasing speeders through the desert. It was exactly the kind of pleasant, uneventful shift that a veteran officer would want for his final night on the job. That all changed at 3:47 a.m. when Kenzo's voice came over the radio with a tone I'd never heard from him before. "Dispatch, Unit 7. I've got something unusual here at mile marker 89. There's a vehicle ahead of me that's, well, it's not behaving like any vehicle I've ever seen." I immediately focused my attention on his transmission. Kenzo was not the type of officer to report something as unusual without good reason. "Unit 7, can you describe what you're observing?" There was a long pause before Kenzo responded, and when he did, his voice carried a mixture of confusion and concern that was completely out of character for him. "Dispatch, I'm following what appears to be a dark sedan, but it's moving in ways that don't make physical sense. It's maintaining a steady speed of about 60 miles per hour, but it's not staying in contact with the road surface. I can see space between the tires and the asphalt." I thought I might have misheard the transmission. "Unit 7, can you repeat that? Did you say the vehicle is not in contact with the road?" "That's affirmative, dispatch. The vehicle appears to be hovering approximately 6 inches above the highway surface. I've been following it for about 2 miles now, and it hasn't touched the ground once. There's no dust being kicked up, no tire noise, and no heat distortion from an exhaust system." I immediately alerted our supervisor and began coordinating backup units to respond to Kenzo's location. Whatever he was encountering, it was clearly beyond the scope of normal patrol activities. "Unit 7, do you want to attempt a traffic stop on this vehicle?" Kenzo's response sent chills down my spine. "Dispatch, I don't think a traffic stop is going to be effective. I just activated my emergency lights to signal the vehicle to pull over, and it responded by accelerating to about 90 miles per hour without any change in engine noise. It's still maintaining the same height above the road surface." Over the next several minutes, I listened as Kenzo provided a running commentary on what he was observing. The vehicle he was following continued to exhibit impossible behavior, making turns that defied the laws of physics, changing direction without slowing down, and maintaining its hovering position above the highway, regardless of road conditions or terrain. "Dispatch, this vehicle just made a 90-degree turn onto a side road without reducing speed or banking into the turn. It simply changed direction instantaneously, like it's not subject to momentum or inertia. I'm continuing to follow, but I need to advise that this situation is unlike anything in my training or experience." I could hear the strain in Kenzo's voice as he tried to make sense of what he was witnessing. This was a man who had spent 25 years dealing with every conceivable type of traffic violation and emergency situation. But he was clearly encountering something that challenged everything he thought he knew about vehicles and physics. At 4:03 a.m., Kenzo's transmission took on an even more urgent tone. "Dispatch, the vehicle has stopped hovering and has come to rest on the road surface. It's positioned sideways across both lanes, completely blocking the highway. I'm approaching on foot to investigate." "Unit 7, please wait for backup before approaching the vehicle," I radioed back. But Kenzo had already left his patrol car and was advancing toward the stopped vehicle. What happened next is recorded on our radio logs and has been analyzed by experts from multiple agencies. But no one has ever been able to provide a satisfactory explanation for Kenzo's final transmissions. "Dispatch, I'm approaching the vehicle now. The doors are open, but I can't see any occupants. Wait. There's something inside the vehicle that doesn't look right. It's like Dispatch, it's like looking into a hole in reality itself. There's no interior to this vehicle, just empty space that seems to go on forever. I could hear Kenzo's breathing becoming more labored as he got closer to the mysterious vehicle. Unit 7, please step back from the vehicle and wait for backup, I transmitted. But he didn't respond to my instruction. Dispatch, I can hear voices coming from inside this, whatever this is. Multiple voices, and they're calling for help. They sound like other officers, other troopers who might be in distress. I can hear someone calling my name, telling me they need assistance. The fear in Kenzo's voice was unmistakable now, but so was his sense of duty. Even faced with something that clearly defied explanation, his first instinct was to help fellow officers who might be in danger. Unit 7, do not enter that vehicle, I transmitted urgently. Backup is en route, ETA 10 minutes. Kenzo's final transmission came at 4:07 a.m., and it's something that still haunts me every night when I try to sleep. Dispatch, I can see them now. There are other officers inside this space, dozens of them, all calling for help. They're wearing uniforms from different states, different time periods. Some of them look like they've been there for years. They're telling me this vehicle travels the highways, collecting officers who get too close, who try to help. They're warning me to stay back, but dispatch, I can hear my own voice calling from inside. I can hear myself asking for help. That was the last coherent transmission we received from Kenzo Hayes. At 4:08 a.m., his radio began transmitting a continuous signal that sounded like multiple voices talking over each other, but the words were indistinguishable. The transmission continued for 17 minutes before cutting off completely. Backup units arrived at mile marker 89 on Highway 6 at 4:19 a.m. and found Kenzo's patrol car parked on the shoulder with the driver's door open and the engine running. His radio was still transmitting the strange multi-voice signal, but there was no sign of Kenzo or any other vehicle in the area. The highway stretched empty in both directions for miles, with no side roads or hiding places where a vehicle could have disappeared. The massive search operation that followed involved helicopters, search dogs, ground teams, and volunteers from across Utah and neighboring states. Every inch of desert within 50 miles of mile marker 89 was searched repeatedly, but no trace of Kenzo Hayes was ever found. His service weapon was missing from his patrol car, along with his radio and flashlight, but his keys, wallet, and other personal belongings were still in the vehicle. The investigation into Kenzo's disappearance was extensive and involved multiple federal agencies. The radio recordings were analyzed by audio experts who confirmed that the voices in the final transmission were real human voices, not electronic manipulation or atmospheric interference. Some of the voices were identified as belonging to police officers who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances in other states over the previous decade. The case remains open, but no credible leads have ever been developed. Kenzo Hayes simply vanished while investigating an impossible vehicle on a stretch of highway where concealment or escape should have been impossible. The official report lists him as missing in the line of duty. But everyone involved in the investigation knows that whatever happened to him was far beyond the scope of normal police work. Since Kenzo's disappearance, the Utah Highway Patrol has implemented a buddy system for all overnight patrols on remote highways. No officer works alone on Highway 6 or similar isolated routes, and all units are required to maintain constant radio contact with dispatch. Officers are specifically instructed to avoid investigating unusual vehicles or phenomena without backup, no matter how urgent the situation might seem. But I know that policy changes and safety procedures can't protect us from whatever Kenzo encountered that night. The voices in his final transmission suggested that this phenomenon has been claiming law enforcement officers for years, possibly decades, and that somewhere in the space between reality and nightmare, those officers might still be calling for help that will never come. Listen, if you've made it this far through these stories, if you've heard what myself and 10 other officers have experienced on America's loneliest highways, then you understand that there are forces at work in our world that go far beyond what we're trained to handle. We are the thin blue line between order and chaos, between the known and the unknown, and sometimes that line takes us places where backup can't follow and procedures can't protect us. Every night, officers like Kenzo Hayes patrol empty highways across this country, responding to calls that might lead them into situations that no amount of training can prepare them for. They face these unknowns not because they have to, but because it's their duty to protect and serve. Even when the dangers they encounter come from realms that science can't explain and policies can't address. If these stories have moved you, if they've made you think differently about the men and women who patrol our highways in the dark hours when most people are safely asleep, then please remember that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite that fear. And somewhere out there, on highways just like the ones in these stories, officers are facing that fear right now, putting themselves between you and the darkness, even when that darkness might claim them as it claimed Kenzo Hayes. The next time you see those red and blue lights in your rearview mirror, or pass a patrol car on a lonely stretch of highway, remember these stories. Remember that the officer behind the wheel might be the last line of defense against forces that most people never imagine exist. And if you're ever driving alone on a dark highway and you see something that doesn't seem quite right, something that defies explanation, don't investigate it yourself. Call for help and pray that the officer who responds makes it home safe to their family. Because some mysteries are too dangerous to solve, and some roads are too dark to travel alone.